My name is Leonid Ivanovich Rogozov Jr. Surgeon. 27 the winter, a small piece of my body decided to make a fool of the rest, and I was posted farther south than the maps in my schoolroom ever bothered to color. Our Antarctic station sat in a shallow bowl of wind and light, a handful of roofs pressed down into the ice as if a giant palm had discouraged them from getting ideas. On clear days, the buildings looked like a child's toy village set precisely on a blank sheet. On storm days, they disappeared, and you learned again how much of civilization is merely the trick of seeing things before the air decides to bury them. We named our rooms because names are how people put a fence around fear. Mess, radio hut, diesel shed, meteorology cabin, storehouse, clinic. The wind knew no names. Diesel lived in the air like a neighbor whose footsteps you hear through the floorboards. We forgave it because warmth is not a polite guest. The clinic was one room with an oak table scarred in straight lines, a sink that coughed and then consented to run, a tray stand with wheels that disliked corners, a cabinet with two glass doors that left pane crackled from corner to corner like a frozen river, and a mirror the size of a schoolchild's slate. I hum that mirror above the table on the day we finish sweeping because every clinic has a mirror, and doctors like to borrow a face now and then to check whether the world believes them. I came with a rolled case of instruments in oiled canvas, 2 white coats, 3 foolishly chosen books that I lied to myself about finishing, and a habit I had earned with blisters during residency. Say what you will do, then do precisely that. The habit is not for the patient. It is for the hand that must move when the room is quiet. Words are planks over the silence at the lip of a cut. We were 12 that season a parish without a church at the bottom of the world. The base chief, a geophysicist with a tidy mind and a tenderness for rock strata, could recite the lineage of a boulder like a family historian. Fedor, the meteorologist, wrote the sky down more faithfully than scripture and could hum a cloud classification as if it were a lullaby. Sasha, our driver, could coax a sulking carburetor into prayer with his broad hands and a sentence that sounded like profanity but was actually romance. The radio operator had fingers too delicate for the crank that kept us in touch with the world. His voice on the line could make you forgive a continent for being made of weather. There were others glaciologists who spoke of ice as if it had personalities, mechanics who treated bolts like cousins, men whose specialties I never entirely understood because the cold bleaches detail, but by week 2 we knew who snored, who sang, off-key after tea, and who would pass you the wrench without making the clack you hate. The days before the pain were ordinary in the way memory pretends it knew what it was doing. I lanced a carbuncle in a place polite men do not discuss. I stitched the index finger of a man who, having warned everyone about the ice saw, demonstrated that the universe despises lectures. I teased a sliver from under Sasha's nail while he told a story about a tractor that fell in love with a horse. At night the generator murmured like a stove-fed animal. The wind combed the station. We played cards with a seriousness that would have embarrassed us at home. I slept with a book open on my chest because a man likes to pretend he is the sort who finishes things. Pain announced itself on a Monday evening, the way a guest taps on the door frame with 2 fingers and then enters without waiting for acknowledgement. Right-lower-quadrant, a dull ache that did not yet deserve its own word. I blamed hunger. I had skipped supper to encourage the radio and flatter the generator. I drink sweet tea. I lay on my left side with my knees drawn up, the posture of old women everywhere forgiven because it helps. The ache retreated like a shy animal, then returned with intention. I pressed my abdomen gently, then with the kind of honesty I reserve for strangers. Rebound. Guarding. A percussion note that had been a drum turned into a stuffed pillow over the cecum. My mouth tasted like pocket lint. 37.4, then 38.1 on the thermometer. I took my pulse out of respect for the obvious. It spoke too quickly for a man sitting still in cold air. At breakfast, the porridge steamed, and I watched the steam as if it were a lab report. Sasha ate with an appetite that was a public service. Fedor read aloud numbers that meant wind to him and time to me. The base chief shuffled papers rock names in stacks like ranks and looked up when he felt my eyes. McBurney's point replied to my finger with a flinch that made me want to slap away my own hand. Comrades, I said because some words lend a room a spine dash. My appendix is inflamed. Spoons paused. Silence rearranged itself. We lived with small dangers at the end of the world, but honest danger has a scent. If it perforates, I will die here, I added, not to frighten them, but to dress the moment. We cannot summon help. I can perform an appendectomy. I have done many. The difficulty, I allowed myself a thin smile, is that I am also the patient. Sasha's large face held disbelief and care at once. You cannot cut your own belly, Leonid Ivanovich, he said, which is what sympathy sounds like when reality takes a seat. I can, I said, and learned by hearing myself that I believed it. I must. Waiting is gambling with peritonitis. Operating is gambling with clumsiness. I choose the gamble I know. Fedor nodded once, the way a man nods when the math and the sky agree with each other. What do we do? He asked, not rhetorically. The list, I said, reaching for paper and the neat hand that convinces nerves someone sober, is upstairs. Boil instruments. Iron drapes. Prepare novocaine. Gosmeni. Catgut and silk. Retractors. Needle driver. 2 hemostats, 3 if the world is generous. Mirror large hung at an angle. Cloth ties. Warm saline. Penicillin. Sulfa. A rubber drain. The list sounded like a prayer disguised as logistics, because that is what it was. We made a theater of the clinic. The table creaked under the scrubbing we gave it. We boiled instruments in the pot that usually kept harness rivets soft. Fedor ironed sheets with a zeal that flattened mountains. Sasha hung the mirror from a radiator pipe with 2 links of wire, adjusting until my abdomen filled the frame like a country on a wall map, borders plausible, details treacherous. I laid out silk in rows like punctuation, catgut in respectful coils. The diesel generator coughed and then found its promise. The lamp hummed like a polite insect. The wind pressed its face to the window and fogged it, jealous of gatherings. I wrote the plan because plans written down talk hands out of stupid decisions. Transverse right-lower-quadrant incision. Local anesthesia novocaine grit. Skin, subcutaneous, fascia. Peritoneum under direct vision. Locate cecum. Find appendix. Mesoappendix clamp and double ligate. Base crush ligate. Invert stump if accessible. Lavage with warm saline. Penicillin intraperitoneal. Place drain. Layered closure. Do not hurry. I underlined the last instruction twice. Hurry is the kindest liar and the cruelest friend. We disinfected like penance. I painted my belly with iodine until I smelled like a hospital dreamed by a shipyard. The men helped me onto the table and tilted it. The mirror trembled, then settled. Novocaine burns and then persuades. I spoke the layers aloud: skin, subcutaneous, fascia later, peritoneum later still, because speaking occupies the part of the brain that wants to panic. The room grew deliberate. The scalpel weighed more than any scalpel I had held. I made a clean transverse incision. Blood greeted and stepped back, polite as a clerk. Fat parted in buttery planes. Fascia told the truth to my fingertips in a way the mirror could not. The peritoneum is a door you do not kick. I lifted it with forceps and nicked it gently. Warm air from the body's indoor world breathed out. The smell iodine, iron, a cautious sweetness that means infection is speaking but not yet shouting filled the room. Clear fluid welled. We were not late. 2 gauze pads protected the lips of the door. Cloth ties through fascia let my left hand lift the wall while my right hand went in. The mirror reversed left and right with cheerful malice. I closed my eyes. Hands tell the truth when eyes are busy making metaphors. The cecum is a familiar cousin if greeted by texture, broad, reassuring, a little rougher to the pads than small bowel. Loops of ilium slithered away like shy fish. The omentum draped itself like an old apron that had seen too much and insisted on seeing more. There behind the curve of the cecum lay the appendix, a stubborn tail pretending to be an organ. Swollen, hot. The tip angry, the base treacherous. The mesoappendix held its little artery like a blue string. Clamp, I said. Fedor, who had never handed a hemostat to anyone and now did not wish to be the man who clacked steel next to his only surgeon's bowel, placed metal in my palm with reverence. I took the mesoappendix. The artery's pulse confided briefly to steel. Catgut looped. The knot drew down square with that small surrender a surgeon's fingers know as music. I wanted, absurdly, to laugh. The room tipped. Not catastrophe tilt. The lamp took 2 steps backward in the corridor of my sight. The edges of the world furred like a collar. I put the clamp on the tray with ceremony noise can undo what attention builds and let my head find the folded towel at my shoulder. 15 in German, because the professor who taught me to count how to voice like a good coat and I was cold. Heart settled. Lamp returned from its walk. Fedor breathed again. I crushed the base with a second clamp, an old trick for persuading tissue to behave. Catgut looped again, the knot sat confident. The appendix came into my palm ridiculous, obscene in its smallness, a sullied trumpet. I slit it because pathology is a habit that persists even without microscopes. Pus glistened with dull satisfaction. Jar, I said. Sasha's big hands presented one with alcohol. I dropped the trader in and felt an unkind tenderness for something that had confessed before it killed me. Lavage, warm saline in, cloudy out. Again clearer. A third time like river water upstream of a town. I injected penicillin into the peritoneum because I've learned to persuade the body from within and because winter at the end of the world forgives superstition if your hands are clean. Stump inversion. A purse string sitting neatly, the little mouth hid. The drain rubber, homely found its corner. Closing a wound you made in your own belly is an ungentle courtesy. Peritoneum, small bites, even, gentle tug, the lips kiss. Thascia listened eventually if I used the voice I reserve for stubborn beasts. Subcutaneous sulked and then consented. Skin, silk, interrupted, neat. The last knot trembled because the hands were finally allowed to feel what they had been doing. I cut the tails and set the scissors down as if laying a sleeping child into a bed. How long? Fedor asked, as if time were a man at the door. 1 hour and 45, I said. It felt like 2 winters and a spring. Relief makes men clumsy. They helped me to the cot. Someone brought broth. The smell was animal and forgiveness. The base chief came with his hat in his hands, an offering from a rational man. The radio operator saluted with the seriousness of a child playing soldier. I did not laugh. Night presented its bill. Pain is a tax that funds repair. I breathed as I teach frightened patients to breathe counting, matching breath to a sentence in my head. You are with me now. I pictured the hospital stairwell in Leningrad where the radiator sings at 3 in the morning and confidence sits on the landing like an old dog. Fever flirted once and retreated embarrassed. The dressing stayed boring in the way one prays for. The drain told a quiet story. Day 2 brought flatus, and if you do not know why a surgeon cheers for such an indignity, I cannot make you love this profession. Tea tasted like tea. Day 3, I dragged myself to the window. The wind interrogated the diesel shed with zeal. Sasha came with a metal cut from a crate slat and a straightened fish hook for a pin. Comrade doctor, he intoned, mock solemn, pinning it above my heart. Fedor applauded with the gravity of a citizen in a city. I bowed like a clown and healed a little from the bow. Day 4, I removed the drain with the respect I reserve for tools that do homely heroics. Day 5, I shaved and felt my name return to me. Day 7, the silt came out. The scar was presumptuous and neat. Day 8, the diesel shed needed a wrench. Ordinary usefulness is a luxury after a man has made himself into a theater. Day 9, I stitched a finger. Profanity served as anesthesia. Gratitude became a dressing. Day 10, I lanced a boil in the back chapter of A Man's Dignity. He laughed when it was over, and I admired him for the laugh. Day 12, the radio operator coughed, and I told him his misery had no poetry. He looked grateful for the insult. Day 14, I was back. Fear stayed, changed its job. It stopped being a wolf at the door and became a dog by the bed, waking me to check the latch. I thought often of the moment the edges of the room furred and how I put the clamp down. That refusal to be theatrical remains the deftest gesture of my career. There were complications because stories that climb cleanly are not true. On the 5th night, colicky cramps argued for an alias. The drain had gone quiet. The dressing behaved. It did not matter. I sat on the edge of the cot, breathed in 4s, counted in German because habits are furniture in the dark, and swore at a gut that remembered the song but had lost the first note. Morning forgave the insult. On day 7, the inferior suture line reddened and whispered a hint of malodor. I snipped one silk with sterile scissors, let a teaspoon of cloudy insistence out, and slept as only the humble sleep. On the 11th, a stitch abscess announced itself like a bead under the scar. I teased it out with the heat-sterilized needle and forgot it by supper. A storm the week after my return made the station sing 3 notes for hours. Snow-filled seams like mortar. The radio went dumb. The generator considered sulking, then convinced by Sasha's hands and flattery settled back in. We dealt cards with reverence. Fedor recited cloud types as if he were praying. The base chief told a story about a boulder that turned out to be an egg of the world. Someone rolled his eyes, and we pretended not to see. I lay awake and listened to the wind argue with carpentry and took comfort in remembering the exact texture of the seacomb. Texture is a friend when sound bullies. Spring at that latitude is not a season. It is a change in light. Shadows soften. The bellies of clouds remember kindness. The ship wrote its name on the horizon, and we pretended not to read it for a day because longing hurts the throat if admitted too early. When it finally arrived, men who had not cried in a decade found dust in their eyes. I stood on the packed snow and looked back at the clinic. The mirror hung from its wire like a reliable lie. The jar on the shelf, my appendix afloat like a guilty fish, had lost alcohol through a hairline crack. The organ had shrunk to an argument not worth finishing. We toasted it with tea because ritual lets men change the subject without losing face. Back in Leningrad, the rooms had radiators that obeyed, and applause that had not earned its place in weather. They asked for the recipe because recipes keep fear out of kitchens. Transverse incision, I said. Local anesthesia, novocaine in a grid. Gentle entry. Finger dissection. Double ligature of mesoappendix. Base crushed and tied. Stump inverted. Lavage with warm saline. Penicillin in the cavity. Drain. Layered closure. Patent scratched. A man in the second row asked if I had been afraid. Yes, I said. A pen dropped in the third row and rolled toward the aisle. No one bent to pick it up for 3 breaths. A woman asked if I considered myself brave. I was careful, I said, and her smile looked like hunger that had just learned the word patience. Smaller rooms asked better questions. A nurse with serious eyes asked whether I prayed. I told my hands what to do, I said. If that counts, then yes. A student with the blushes of a boy asked if I fainted. Almost, I said. I put the clamp down first. An administrator asked if I would consent to photographs. Choose the table, the lamp, the mirror, I said. Leave out the mouth of the wound. He frowned. Newspapers love mouths. The appendix did not come home. It bobbed in its jar on the shelf like a warning that had forgotten its speech. The alcohol slipped away through the crack. The organ shrank to an affront. One evening it looked like something swept from under a bed. We disposed of it without ceremony. The room forgot. My hands did not. My scar itches when pressure falls. That is not poetry. It is physics translated into flesh. Sometimes at night I lay my palm over it the way a man touches the stair rail to be sure the house has not moved. When I cannot sleep, I count to 15 in German because numbers are chairs in the dark and the professor's voice left furniture. In the mornings after such nights, I carry myself through the kitchen with the caution of a man who has learned not to hurry when he cannot run. Ordinary medicine welcomed me back like a kitchen after a funeral, with relief that stirring soup is still a language. I stitched a drunk's eyebrow without interrogating his story. I removed a gallbladder from a woman who rolled her eyes at the organ as if it were a child who had colored on the wall. We will ask it to behave, I told her, then made a neat wound and a polite closure and put civility where inflammation had been. I reduced a hernia in a man who apologized for existing. I forgave him with my hands because I had been a man apologizing to his own abdomen. Occasionally, a clipping found me with a headline that herded adjectives ahead of nouns like sheep. At the end of the earth, doctor operates on himself. I folded them and placed them in a drawer where I keep letters from old instructors and a tram ticket from my last night in the city before the ice. On a stairwell, a student asked if I considered myself a hero. A man with 2 hands and a scar, I said. It sounded rehearsed because I had been trying on the answer during nights when the wind spoke in a language I almost understood. I taught a short course for men and women bound for places that do not believe in hospitals. We met in a classroom with radiators that did not need encouragement. I brought the cracked mirror because it had learned a language I wanted my students to hear. I hung it from a pipe with wire and asked them to tie square knots with their eyes closed. I placed gauze in a bowl of warm water and told them to keep their fingers there until they forgot they were afraid of being slow. I told them about the clamp and the moment when counting to 15 is exact science. I watched their faces travel from admiration useless in the field to willingness, which is the only currency a body accepts. Letters arrived. My mother wrote in tidy lines that scolded and forgave in the same sentence. "Do not do that again," she wrote, and I promised like a boy asked to swear off fireworks. She came to a talk in a city building and sat in the front row with her hands folded in the lap that had held me as a feverish child. On the way home, she pressed the side of my jacket where the scar lived and said, "You had better not make a habit." "I will make a habit of avoiding habits," I said, and she laughed despite herself. The cracked mirror came with me to my office and leaned behind the door. Every now and then a patient caught his own face at an angle and tugged at his collar without knowing why. I told no one it had been my second pair of eyes. Later, when I retired it from clinics, I hung it in my hallway at home and used it to check my hat. In winter, when the barometer fell, the line in the glass showed itself more plainly. The scar in my belly agreed. Time changed the taste of the story. In the first year, it tasted of iodine and diesel and silk drawn through skin and the metallic mouth of fear. In the 5th, it tasted of applause and stale hall air and of my jaw aching from microphones. In the 10th, it tasted of patience, of German numbers, of the relief of being a doctor again in a city where snow behaves like a name rather than a personality. In the 20th, it tasted of quiet and of gratitude that does not need to be pointed at anyone. There is an unflattering truth. I am proudest not of the incision, not of the knot, but of the way the room learned to be a team. Sasha's light did not shake because he decided he would be a small son. Fedor's mirror lied less than it might have because he let the angle teach his wrist humility quickly. The base chief stayed in the doorway with his hat in his hands, because sometimes a hat is the only sacrament a rational man allows. The room remembered the work better than the wind remembered the building. Once, in a chapel built for tired doctors, a chaplain with a face like an old shoe asked if I pray. I tell my hands what to do and then listen, I said. He nodded as if I had quoted scripture by mistake. That will do, he said, for most of us. Antarctica erases what you write on it nightly. The wind has beautiful penmanship, but the body keeps archives the continent cannot edit. My hands remember the warmth when the peritoneum opened. They remember the weight and silence of a hemostat offered without cluck. They remember fascia under silk and the angle of a purse string. They remember counting to 15 in German because a good teacher put furniture in the hallway of my mind. When I am old enough to drop cups and laugh because the crash is only a request for a broom, I hope my hands still obey the sentence I underlined twice. I have left out something simple, the loneliness. A man can be surrounded by 11 good men and still be alone with a decision. The closest help was an ocean and a season away. I tell this because sometimes audiences imagine their awe can replace distance. Awe is a spectator sport. Distance is a weather system. I learned on that table that the only thing that crosses it is work. I once visited a museum because a curator swore he had a heroic appendix and wanted me to speak in front of it. It was not mine, he meant another. The jar was cloudy. The label was eager. People drifted past because an organ without a narrative is a thing, and things cannot hold attention without stories to rub against. I stood long enough to feel both foolish and affectionate. We left ours where it belonged, I told the curator. He looked wounded on behalf of glass. I told him a jar can be a coffin or a trophy, and neither sits well in a room with children. Some nights I return to the table in a dream. The mirror shows not my abdomen, but rooms I have worked in since. A delivery suite where a boy's first breath sounded like a match. A trauma bay where a drunk apologized to me for the blood while he was bleeding. A small clinic where a woman asked me to tell her gallbladder to be ashamed. In each room, I repeat the same line at the lip of the cut, say what you will do, then do exactly that, and the hands take the instruction like bread. There were moments after the operation when I caught myself angry at the organ for being a fool, at the continent for staging a theater and handing me both parts, at the mirror for lying in the exact way I needed it to lie. I have made my peace with these angers because they are misplaced love. A surgeon who does not love organs should learn to sell shoes. I went back once, years later, not to winter over, but to stand on a piece of deck and watch men who were younger than I had been talk as if diesel had invented them. The clinic had been moved into a newer building that did not smell of shipyards and iodine. The old mirror lay in a crate, unaware of its resume. I held it and saw a man in his 40s whose hair had begun to practice snow. I hung it briefly and the glass remembered how to lie. I did not stage nostalgia. I put it back in its crate and told the young doctor, a woman with hands that already knew the angle of a purse string, to keep it as a piece of furniture that might be needed again. You want a single sentence to take away like a spoon from a restaurant. I am not a restaurant and my kitchen is not tidy enough to entertain thieves. But if you insist, take this, written once in a neat hand on a scrap of paper in a room where the lamp hummed and the wind argued with carpentry, and underlined twice. Do not hurry. It is not merely a technique. It is an ethic. A body will forgive most things if you apologize with clean hands and refuse to be in a rush. The night before we left the ice for the last time, Sasha knocked on my door and presented a gift wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside was a small length of wire and a bolt, polished. In case you need to hang a mirror again, he said. We laughed to make the idea an absurdity. I keep the wire in the drawer with the tram ticket and the clippings and the letters from instructors who taught me how to stand at a table without arrogance. Sometimes I take it out and put it on the desk and look at it the way men look at tools they hope never to use. When I tell this story now, I leave pauses in places where once I would have filled the room with sentences. The pauses are where the mirrors go. I have learned to respect them. I have learned to trust that a room full of people will put their own faces there and learn what they need to learn, which is nearly always, say what you will do it, do not hurry, find a friend to hold the lamp steady, forgive the organ for. Being itself, and count in the language of the teacher whose voice lives in your head when the edges of the world fur. If there is an ending, it is small by design. A kitchen at night, the kettle beginning its whisper. A hand over a scar translating pressure into weather reports. A length of wire and a bolt on a desk tidy as 2 words. And a man older now, hair practicing snow, who still tells his hands what to do and still listens for their answer before he moves.